The crack of gunfire echoed through the valley, startling the team of horses pulling the transcontinental mail coach as it barreled down the dusty trail toward Dalhart, Texas. 19-year-old Nora Larson clutched the wooden seat beneath her, knuckles white with fear as the stagecoach lurched violently over the uneven terrain. It was 1876, and what should have been a routine journey across the frontier had just become a desperate fight for survival. Bandits. The driver shouted, his voice nearly lost to the thundering hooves and creaking wood. Hold on tight. Nora had never imagined her journey west would end like this. After losing her parents to influenza in Boston, she'd accepted her aunt's invitation to start anew in Dalhart. The promise of open skies and fresh opportunities had seemed like salvation from her grief. Now, as bullets splintered the wood beside her head, that dream was rapidly unraveling. "Get down!" bellowed the shotgun messenger beside the driver, returning fire as the coach accelerated to a dangerous speed. The elderly woman seated across from Nora whimpered in terror. The businessman beside her had already dropped to the floor, covering his head with his valise. Nora's heart hammered against her ribs as the coach hit a particularly deep rut, sending everyone airborne for a terrifying moment. When they crashed back down, something snapped beneath them, the sickening sound of breaking wood followed by the driver's curse. The coach began to list dangerously to one side, the wheels on the right grinding metal against stone. "The axle's breaking," the driver shouted. "I can't hold them." The horses, already panicked by gunfire, veered sharply as the coach started to disintegrate beneath them. Nora felt the world tilt, the door beside her flinging open as the coach careened toward a steep embankment. In a horrifying instant, she was sliding toward the opening, her hands scrambling for purchase on the smooth leather seats. "Help!" she screamed, but her fellow passengers were fighting their own battles against gravity. Her fingers caught the door frame for just a moment before the coach hit another boulder, jolting violently. The impact threw her clear through the doorway. Time seemed to slow as Nora tumbled through the air, her modest traveling dress billowing around her. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she closed her eyes, bracing for an impact that would surely shatter her bones. Instead, she collided with something solid yet yielding. Strong arms wrapped around her, absorbing the momentum of her fall. The breath knocked from her lungs. Nora gasped, her eyes flying open to meet a pair of startlingly blue ones, framed by sun-bronzed skin and a dusting of trail dust. "I've got you, miss," a deep voice assured her as they both tumbled to the ground, the man taking the brunt of the fall against his shoulder. Behind them, the stagecoach continued its chaotic descent down the slope, finally coming to rest against a stand of cottonwoods. The horses, miraculously still attached, dragged it several more yards before stopping, trembling and lathered with sweat. Nora found herself cradled against a broad chest, the steady thump of a heartbeat beneath her ear grounding her in the aftermath of terror. As the dust settled around them, she finally saw her rescuer, clearly a tall cowboy with wheat-colored hair peeking from beneath a well-worn Stetson. "You all right, miss?" he asked, concern evident in his voice as he carefully helped her sit upright. I think so," Nora managed, her voice shaky. "You caught me." A slight smile crossed his face, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. "Wade Keller at your service. Seems I was in the right place at the right time." Behind them, more hoofbeats approached the bandits Nora feared until she saw Wade relax. "Sheriff's posse," he explained, nodding toward the riders. "I was scouting ahead. We got word of stage robberies in these parts." He looked her over with practiced efficiency. "Any pain, anything broken?" Nora took stock of herself, noting the tears in her dress and scrapes on her palms, but nothing worse. Just shaken, I think. The others, Wade helped her to her feet, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow. Let's check on them. Can you walk? As they made their way down to the wrecked coach, Nora couldn't help but notice the easy confidence in Wade's stride, the way his eyes constantly scanned their surroundings for danger. He moved like a man accustomed to the harsh realities of frontier life, yet the hand supporting her was surprisingly gentle. The sheriff and his men had already reached the coach and were helping the other passengers. The elderly woman had a nasty gash on her forehead, and the businessman seemed to have broken his wrist, but miraculously, everyone had survived. The driver sat on a rock, clutching his ribs and looking morosely at the damaged vehicle. Larson, the sheriff read from the tag on Nora's trunk, which had been thrown clear of the wreckage. That you, miss? Yes, sir, Nora Larson, she confirmed. I'm headed to Dalhart to my aunt's place. The sheriff, a weathered man with a salt and pepper mustache, nodded. Martha Finch's niece. She's been talking about your arrival for weeks. He gestured toward Wade. Keller here can take you the rest of the way. It's not far, and we need to get these folks to Doc Simmons. Wade tipped his hat. Happy to oblige, Sheriff. My horse can carry double for that distance. The thought of riding with this stranger made Nora hesitate, but only for a moment. In the wilderness of Texas, conventional proprieties sometimes had to bend to practical necessities. Besides, this man had just saved her life. Thank you, she said, gathering what dignity she could muster with her torn dress and disheveled appearance. I'd be grateful for the assistance. Wade retrieved her trunk and secured it to his horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding that stood patiently despite the commotion. With surprising ease, he lifted Nora onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. Hold tight to the horn, he instructed, his breath warm against her ear. Rusty's gentle, but the trail's rough in spots. As they set off toward Dalhart, leaving the sheriff's posse to deal with the injured passengers and damaged coach, Nora felt oddly secure despite the impropriety of their position. The solid presence at her back, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, even the unfamiliar scent of leather, horse, and sun-warmed skin, all of it represented safety after the terror of the stagecoach attack. Were you hurt at all? She asked, suddenly remembering how he'd cushioned her fall with his own body. When you caught me, Wade chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest against her back. Takes more than catching a falling angel to put me out of commission, Miss Larson. The compliment brought warmth to Nora's cheeks, and she was glad he couldn't see her face. I'm hardly an angel, Mr. Keller, just a very lucky young woman. Wade, he corrected. Out here, formalities don't last long, and I'd say I was the lucky one being in the right spot to help. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the landscape gradually changing from rugged hills to the more open plains surrounding Dalhart. In the distance, Nora could make out the scattered buildings of the town, looking small and vulnerable against the vast Texas sky. What brings you to Dalhart? Wade eventually asked. Not many young ladies choose to come this far west willingly. Nora sighed, the grief she'd been trying to outrun suddenly close again. My parents died last winter, influenza. My Aunt Martha is my only remaining family. Wade's arm tightened briefly around her waist, a gesture of sympathy that required no words. Martha's good people, makes the best apple pie in 3 counties. The simple statement, delivered with such certainty, made Nora smile despite herself. So I've heard in her letters. She writes about everyone in town as if I should know them already. That's Dalhart for you. Small enough that everybody knows everybody's business, big enough that it mostly doesn't matter. As they approached the outskirts of town, Nora felt a curious mixture of anxiety and anticipation. The stagecoach attack had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, but something about this place, the openness of the land, the clear blue of the sky, perhaps even the steady presence of the cowboy behind her, made her feel as if she might eventually find peace here. "There it is," Wade said, pointing toward a neat white house with blue shutters at the edge of town. "Martha's place. Best view in Dalhart, according to her." A plump woman with silver-streaked hair was already hurrying down the front path as they approached, her expression shifting from welcome to concern as she took in the sight of Nora arriving on horseback with a cowboy instead of by stagecoach. "Nora, good heavens, what happened?" Martha called, reaching them just as Wade dismounted and turned to help Nora down. The moment her feet touched the ground, Nora's legs buckled beneath her, the delayed reaction to danger finally catching up. Wade caught her again, this time around the waist, steadying her with those same strong hands that had saved her life. "Stagecoach was attacked about 5 miles back," he explained to Martha. "Broken axle trying to outrun them. Your niece here took a tumble right out the door." Martha's eyes widened in horror. "Attacked? Oh, my poor dear." She rushed forward to embrace Nora, enveloping her in the scent of lavender and baking bread. "Are you hurt? Should we send for the doctor?" "I'm fine, Aunt Martha," Nora assured her, finding her voice. "Thanks to Mr. Keller. He caught me when I fell and brought me safely to you." Martha turned grateful eyes to Wade. "God bless you, Wade Keller. I should have known if anyone would be there when needed, it'd be you." She took Nora's arm, already guiding her toward the house. "Come inside, both of you. The least I can offer is a hot meal and coffee after such an ordeal." Wade hesitated, looking down at his dusty clothes. "I should probably—" "Nonsense," Martha cut him off firmly. "I won't hear of you riding off without proper thanks. Besides, your father's stopping by later to discuss the cattle drive. You might as well wait for him here." Something flickered across Wade's face at the mention of his father, but he nodded, tying his horse to the hitching post before retrieving Nora's trunk. As he followed them up the path, Nora couldn't help glancing back at him, this stranger who had so dramatically entered her life. For just a moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their lives had become unexpectedly entangled in ways neither could have foreseen when the day began. Inside Martha's cozy home, the horror of the stagecoach attack began to recede. The kitchen was warm and filled with delicious smells, the windows letting in streams of golden afternoon light. Martha fussed over Nora, insisting she change out of her torn traveling dress while she prepared a meal. Left alone in the small guest bedroom that would now be hers, Nora stood at the window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape. Dalhart was nothing like Boston. The buildings were newer, more roughly hewn, the streets unpaved, the horizon seemingly endless. Yet something about it called to her, promising a freedom she had never known in the confines of proper society. When she returned to the kitchen in a fresh dress, her hair hastily repinned, she found Wade seated at the table, a cup of coffee before him. He rose immediately at her entrance, an ingrained courtesy that surprised her. "You look much better, Miss Larson," he said, pulling out a chair for her. "The color's coming back to your cheeks." "Thank you," she replied, taking the offered seat. "And please call me Nora. As you said, formalities don't last long out here." A smile tugged at his lips. "Nora, then." Martha bustled around them, setting out plates of fried chicken, biscuits, and fresh vegetables from her garden. "Eat up, both of you. Nothing settles the nerves like a good meal." She paused, her expression darkening. "I can't believe those bandits are still operating. Sheriff Anderson promised he'd put a stop to it." "They're getting bolder," Wade acknowledged, accepting the plate Martha handed him. "That's why Pa asked me to ride with the posse today." We've lost cattle recently too, not just to rustlers, but to men who'll shoot the beasts just for spite." "Spite?" Nora asked, confused. "Why would anyone do that?" Wade and Martha exchanged glances. "The war may be over on paper," Martha explained gently, "but not in everyone's hearts." The Kellers stood with the Union, which didn't make them popular with some folks around here. Nora looked at Wade with new understanding. The frontier had its own complex politics, its own lingering wounds from the conflict that had torn the nation apart. "I'm sorry. That must be difficult." Wade shrugged, though something in his eyes suggested the casualness was feigned. "It's getting better. Most people are too busy trying to survive out here to hold grudges, and the railroad coming through last year brought new blood, people without old hatreds." "Like you," Martha said to Nora with a smile. "A fresh start for Dalhart and for you too." The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they ate Martha's gossip about the townspeople, Wade's stories about life on his family's ranch, the upcoming harvest festival that was the social highlight of Dalhart's year. By the time they finished eating, Nora felt as if she'd known them both for years rather than hours. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Wade's father, a tall man with the same wheat-colored hair, now liberally streaked with gray. James Keller greeted Martha warmly, nodded politely to Nora, and clasped his son's shoulder with obvious pride. "Heard what happened with the stagecoach," he said. "Quick thinking, son." "Just happened to be in the right place," Wade replied. That same modesty Nora had noticed earlier coloring his tone. As the two men prepared to leave, discussing ranch business and the upcoming cattle drive to Kansas, Nora found herself reluctant to see Wade go. He had been her anchor in a terrifying moment, and his departure somehow made the day's events more real again. At the door, he turned back to her, hat in hand. "I'll check in tomorrow if that's all right. Make sure you're recovering well." "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with the sincerity of her response. "Thank you again, Wade." He settled his hat on his head, tipping it slightly in her direction. "Until tomorrow, Nora." As she watched him ride away beside his father, Martha came to stand next to her. "That's a good man there," she said softly. "One of the best in Dalhart." Nora nodded, unable to disagree. "He saved my life today." Martha patted her arm. "Get some rest, dear. It's been quite a day for you, and tomorrow will bring its own adventures." Later, lying in her new bed beneath a handmade quilt, Nora stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. The events of the day played through her mind like scenes from a dime novel: the attack, the terrifying moment of falling, the unexpected safety of strong arms catching her. Sleep seemed impossible with her thoughts racing so. Outside her window, the Texas sky stretched vast and star-filled, so different from Boston's narrow views between tall buildings. This new world was dangerous, yes, but also exhilarating in its possibilities. And somewhere out there, under the same star-filled sky, was a cowboy who had caught her when she fell. With that comforting thought, Nora finally drifted into sleep, her dreams filled with blue eyes and the rhythmic motion of a horse beneath her. True to his word, Wade appeared at Martha's door the following afternoon, looking considerably more polished than the trail-dusty cowboy of the previous day. He'd clearly made an effort with his appearance clean-shaven, hair neatly combed, wearing a fresh shirt under his vest. "Miss Nora," he greeted her, hat in hand. "How are you feeling today?" "Much better, thank you," she replied, suddenly aware of the informal way she'd pinned up her hair, not expecting visitors. "Please come in." Martha had gone to her Women's Aid Society meeting, leaving Nora alone in the house. Under normal circumstances, receiving a male caller unchaperoned would be scandalous, but Dalhart clearly operated under different rules than Boston society. "I brought you something," Wade said, producing a small paper-wrapped package from his pocket. A welcome to Dalhart, and maybe something to help you forget yesterday's troubles. Curious, Nora unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver hairpin topped with a tiny star. "It's beautiful," she breathed, touching the star with one finger. "Texas is the Lone Star State," Wade explained, looking pleased at her reaction. "Thought you might like a reminder that even though you're far from home, you're under the same stars." The thoughtfulness of the gift touched her deeply. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." A slightly awkward silence fell between them, broken when Wade cleared his throat. "I was wondering if you might like a proper introduction to Dalhart, one that doesn't involve flying out of stagecoaches. I could show you around town if you'd like." The offer was tempting. While Martha had promised to take her into town the following day, the prospect of exploring with Wade held its own appeal. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. "Let me get my shawl." Dalhart was a young town, having sprung up around the cattle trails and more recently the railroad. Wade guided her down the main street, pointing out the essential landmarks: the general store, the small church, the schoolhouse, the sheriff's office, and the cattleman's bank. People nodded to Wade as they passed, many stopping to introduce themselves to Nora with genuine warmth. "Everyone seems to know you," she observed as they left the general store, where the proprietor had insisted on giving her a peppermint stick, on the house. Wade smiled ruefully. "The Kellers were among the first families to settle here after the war. My father helped establish the town council." Hard to be anonymous with that history. "Is it difficult, being known by everyone?" He considered this as they walked toward the livery stable, where Wade wanted to introduce her to the owner, an old friend of his. "Sometimes, people have expectations. But mostly it's good. There's always someone to help when you need it, always someone who cares what happens to you." The simple observation struck Nora deeply. In Boston, despite the crowds, she had often felt invisible, especially after her parents' deaths. Here, she had been in town less than a day, and already a dozen people had welcomed her by name, expressed concern about the stagecoach attack, offered assistance if she needed anything. At the livery, they found the owner, Samuel Tucker, shoeing a dappled mare. He wiped his hands on a rag before shaking Nora's. "Heard about your dramatic arrival," he said with a friendly smile. "Not many folks make quite such an entrance to Dalhart." "I hope not to make a habit of it," Nora replied, earning a chuckle from both men. Samuel turned to Wade. "You're gelding through a shoe this morning. I've fixed him up good as new, but you might want to check that left front hoof regularly. Seems a bit tender." The casual way they discussed horses and their care made Nora acutely aware of how little she knew about life in this frontier town. In Boston, horses were simply the creatures that pulled carriages, virtually invisible to their passengers. Here, they were partners in survival, worthy of discussion and careful attention. As if sensing her thoughts, Wade included her in the conversation. "Nora, have you much experience with horses?" She shook her head. "Very little, I'm afraid. We had carriages in Boston, but I never learned to ride." Samuel and Wade exchanged looks that suggested this was a significant handicap in their eyes. "Can't get far in Texas without riding," Samuel observed, "especially out at Martha's place." "I could teach you," Wade offered, "if you'd like to learn." The prospect was both intimidating and exciting. "I would, actually. It seems an essential skill here." Their tour continued past the small schoolhouse, where classes had just been dismissed. Children raced around them, laughing and shouting as they headed home. One small girl with braids stopped abruptly in front of Wade, looking up at him with adoration. "Mr. Keller, did you bring Rusty?" "Can I pet him today?" Wade crouched down to her level, his face softening. "Not today, Lily. He's resting at the livery, but next time, I promise." He turned to include Nora. "Miss Larson, this is Lily Peterson. Her pa runs the feed store." The child bobbed a hasty curtsy. "Are you the lady who flew out of the stagecoach?" Nora couldn't help laughing at the dramatic description. "I'm afraid so. Though I didn't exactly fly, I fell." Lily's eyes widened. "And Mr. Keller caught you, like a princess." Before Nora could formulate a response to this romantic interpretation, Wade smoothly intervened. "Miss Larson is Martha Finch's niece, Lily. She's come to live in Dalhart." This information seemed to delight the child even more. "Mrs. Finch makes the best cookies. Will you make cookies too?" "Lily," a woman's voice called from down the street. "Time to come home." The girl waved goodbye and dashed off, leaving Nora and Wade chuckling in her wake. "News travels fast in a small town," Wade observed. "By sundown, I suspect everyone will have heard Lily's version of your rescue." "Which apparently involved flying and princesses," Nora added with a smile. "Should I be concerned about my reputation?" Wade's expression grew more serious. "Not at all. Folks here are practical. They understand that in emergency situations, conventional rules don't always apply." As they continued their walk, the conversation flowed easily between them. Wade told her about growing up in Dalhart, watching it transform from a simple cattle stop to a proper town. Nora shared stories of Boston, its crowded streets and cultural attractions so different from the raw frontier. "Do you miss it?" Wade asked as they reached the edge of town, where buildings gave way to open prairie. "The city, I mean." Nora considered this thoughtfully. "I miss certain things: bookshops, concerts, the ocean." She looked out at the vast expanse before them, golden in the late afternoon light. "But there's something about this place. It feels like you can breathe here." "That's exactly it," Wade said, sounding pleased that she understood. "Space to breathe, to be yourself without all the walls, physical or otherwise." They had reached a small rise overlooking the town, with Martha's house visible in the distance. The setting sun painted everything in rich gold and amber tones, the scattered buildings of Dalhart glowing warmly against the landscape. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly. "Yes," Wade agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her rather than the view. The moment stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Then Wade cleared his throat, breaking the spell. "We should head back. Martha will be wondering where you've gone." The walk back to Martha's house was quieter, a comfortable silence between them. At the gate, Wade hesitated before speaking. "The Harvest Festival is next Saturday. The whole town gathers for food, music, dancing. Would you, that is, I'd be honored if you would consider attending with me." The formal invitation, delivered with such earnestness, touched Nora deeply. "I'd like that very much, Wade." His smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I'll call for you at 4 then." He tipped his hat. "Good evening, Nora." Martha was waiting inside, her knowing smile suggesting she had observed their return. "Had a nice tour, did you?" "Yes," Nora replied, unable to keep the happiness from her voice. "Wade has invited me to the Harvest Festival." Martha's smile widened. "Has he now? Well, we'll need to make sure you have a suitable dress." She patted Nora's hand. "It's good to see you smiling, dear. After everything you've been through, you deserve some joy." The days leading up to the Harvest Festival passed in a blur of activity. Martha insisted on introducing Nora to what felt like every resident of Dalhart, proudly presenting her niece at church services, the general store, and her Women's Aid Society meeting. Everyone welcomed Nora warmly, many mentioning her dramatic arrival and subsequent rescue. True to his word, Wade began teaching Nora to ride. They started with a gentle mare borrowed from a neighbor, with Wade patiently explaining the basics of horsemanship. Nora proved a quick study, her initial nervousness giving way to genuine enjoyment as she gained confidence. "You're a natural," Wade told her during their third lesson, watching as she successfully guided the mare through a series of simple turns. "Most city folks take weeks to get comfortable in the saddle." Nora flushed with pleasure at the compliment. "I have an excellent teacher." These riding lessons became the highlight of her days. Wade was unfailingly patient, his instructions clear, his encouragement genuine. They often rode together across the open land surrounding Dalhart, Wade pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood adventures. During one such ride, they stopped to rest by a small creek. Sitting on a fallen log, watching water bubble over stones, Nora found herself opening up about her parents, the devastating swiftness of the influenza that had taken them, the lonely months that followed. "I felt so lost," she admitted, surprising herself with her candor. "As if my entire world had disappeared overnight. Coming here was less about starting fresh and more about running away, I think." Wade listened without interrupting, his blue eyes intent on her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "My mother died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. I remember that feeling like the ground had vanished beneath my feet. The shared grief created a deeper connection between them. Does it ever go away?" Nora asked softly. That hollow feeling, Wade considered this, absently twisting a blade of grass between his fingers. "Not entirely, but eventually it makes room for other feelings. You start building a new foundation, piece by piece." He looked up at her then, his expression open and honest. "Having you here in Dalhart, it's like finding a piece I didn't know was missing." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Nora felt her heart quicken, recognizing that they had crossed some invisible threshold. Wade must have realized it too, for he quickly stood, offering his hand to help her up. "We should head back. Looks like rain coming." The ride back was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts too new and fragile to voice aloud. The day of the harvest festival arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp, clear, with just enough breeze to rustle the decorative cornstalks and paper lanterns that had been set up in the town square. Martha had helped Nora prepare a new dress for the occasion, a becoming blue calico that brought out the amber highlights in her chestnut hair. "You look beautiful, dear," Martha said as she pinned the silver star hairpin that Wade had given her into Nora's upswept hair. "Wade won't be able to take his eyes off you." Nora blushed. "Aunt Martha, you make it sound as if what? As if a fine young man is sweet on you. As if you might be sweet on him too." Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. "I may be old, but I'm not blind. I see the way you light up when he comes calling, the way he watches you when he thinks no one's looking." Before Nora could formulate a response, a knock at the door announced Wade's arrival. Martha winked at her before going to answer it, giving Nora a moment to compose herself. Wade stood in the doorway, hat in hand, wearing a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best denims. His hair was neatly combed, his boots polished. But it was the expression on his face when he saw Nora that took her breath away, a mixture of admiration, delight, and something deeper that made her heart skip. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy despite the hours they had spent together over the past week. "You look very handsome yourself." Martha shooed them out the door with instructions not to return too early. "Enjoy yourselves. Youth is for dancing and laughter." The town square had been transformed with lanterns, hay bales arranged for seating, and tables laden with food contributed by every household in Dalhart. A small band was setting up on a makeshift stage fiddle, banjo, guitar, and harmonica. Wade introduced Nora to his father and younger brothers, who had ridden in from their ranch for the celebration. James Keller greeted her warmly, his resemblance to Wade striking up close. "So you're the young lady who literally fell into my son's arms," he said with a twinkle in his eye. Most fortunate timing on his part. As darkness fell, the lanterns were lit, casting a golden glow over the festivities. The band struck up a lively tune, and couples began to fill the cleared space in the center of the square. "May I have this dance?" Wade asked, offering his hand to Nora. She hesitated. "I should warn you, I'm not familiar with your dances here." "Just follow my lead," he encouraged. "It's easier than riding, and you mastered that quickly enough." The dance was indeed simpler than she had feared, a spirited reel that had them weaving between other couples, clasping hands and then separating, only to come together again. Wade's hand was warm and steady in hers, his guidance subtle but clear. By the second dance, Nora had caught the rhythm of it, laughing as they twirled across the packed earth. During a break in the dancing, Wade brought her a cup of punch and a plate of food. They found a hay bale slightly removed from the crowd, where they could eat and watch the continuing festivities. "Having fun?" Wade asked. "More than I've had in ages," Nora admitted. "Everyone has been so welcoming." It's nothing like Boston society functions, where everyone is judging your every move, your clothes, your connections. What were those like? The society functions, Nora sighed, remembering. Elaborate, formal, exhausting. Ladies in expensive gowns trying to outdo each other, gentlemen discussing business and politics while pretending to be interested in dancing. Everything carefully choreographed and proper. Wade chuckled. "Doesn't sound like much fun." It wasn't really. Though I didn't realize that until now, seeing how different things can be. She gestured toward the dancers, where people of all ages moved together, some skillfully, others with more enthusiasm than grace, all clearly enjoying themselves. "This is real." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Wade stood, offering his hand again. "One more dance before we take a longer break. I'd like to show you something." This dance was different. Wade's hand at her waist, their bodies closer, moving in a gentle rhythm that felt both foreign and somehow familiar. Nora was acutely aware of his nearness, the subtle scent of soap and leather, the careful way he guided her through the steps. When the music ended, Wade didn't immediately release her hand. Instead, he led her away from the square, toward the edge of town where they had stood that first day. "Where are we going?" Nora asked, curious but trusting. "You'll see," was all he would say. They climbed the small rise that overlooked Dalhart, now a collection of twinkling lights in the darkness. Above them, the sky was a vast canvas of stars, more than Nora had ever seen. "Oh," she breathed, gazing upward. "It's magnificent," Wade nodded, following her gaze. "Best view in Texas, according to my pa. He brought my mother up here to propose to her." The implication of his words hung in the air, making Nora's heart beat faster. Wade turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Nora, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past days have been the best of my life. There's something between us, something I've never felt before." She could barely breathe, caught in the intensity of his blue gaze. "I feel it too." Encouraged, he continued, "I'm not asking for any promises yet, just permission to court you properly, to see where this might lead." Relief and joy flooded through her. "Yes, Wade, I'd like that very much." His smile was radiant in the starlight. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers, a kiss as light as a whisper. Yet it sent warmth cascading through her entire body. When they returned to the festival, hand in hand, Martha caught Nora's eye across the square and smiled knowingly. Something had changed between them. A door opened to possibilities that neither had anticipated when Nora tumbled from that runaway stagecoach, just a week earlier. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Nora's life. Wade called regularly, taking her riding, bringing small, thoughtful gifts, wildflowers, a book of poetry he'd found in the general store, once even a kitten from a litter born in their barn. "She reminded me of you," he explained as the tiny calico batted playfully at Nora's fingers. Independent but affectionate. Martha watched their courtship with approving eyes, often finding reasons to make herself scarce when Wade visited. "Young love needs a little privacy," she told Nora with a wink. Nora threw herself into learning the skills needed for frontier life. Martha taught her to bake the famous apple pie that Wade had mentioned, to preserve fruits and vegetables for winter, to manage a household with resources far more limited than what she had known in Boston. Wade's father and brothers welcomed her warmly whenever she visited the Keller ranch, a substantial spread of land with a comfortable two-story house, barns, and corrals. James Keller took obvious pleasure in showing her around, pointing out improvements made since they'd settled the land after the war. "Wade designed that irrigation system," he told her proudly, indicating a clever network of ditches that directed water from a nearby stream to their fields. Boys got a knack for seeing how things could work better. It was during one such visit, as autumn deepened toward winter, that Nora first heard the full story of the tensions affecting the region. They had gathered around the Kellers' large dining table: Nora, Wade, James, and Wade's younger brothers Thomas and Daniel. The conversation had turned to preparations for winter when a rider appeared in the yard, one of the ranch hands returning from town with the mail and supplies. The young cowboy burst into the house without ceremony, his expression grim. "Mr. Keller, there's been trouble. Simmons' place was hit last night, barn burned, cattle scattered, warning painted on the house." James Keller's face hardened. "Anyone hurt?" "No, sir." Family was in town for the night, thankfully. Wade stood, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alert tension. "What kind of warning?" The cowboy glanced uncomfortably at Nora before answering. "Said union lovers get out and some other ugly things I won't repeat in mixed company." A heavy silence fell over the room. Nora looked from face to face, seeing anger, resignation, and determination in the Keller men's expressions. "It's the Carson brothers again," Thomas said finally. "Has to be." James nodded grimly. "Most likely. Sheriff needs to be told." "I'll ride into town," Wade offered, already moving toward the door. He paused, looking back at Nora. "I'm sorry about this. I'll take you back to Martha's first." But Nora stood, a decision forming. "No, I want to understand what's happening. If I'm to be part of this community, part of your life, I need to know the difficulties as well as the joys." Wade hesitated, then nodded. "Pa can explain while I'm gone. I'll be back as soon as I can." After Wade had ridden out, James Keller sighed heavily, gesturing for Nora to sit. "It's an old story, I'm afraid. The Carsons' three brothers and their father were Confederate diehards, lost everything in the war, blame folks like us who stood with the Union for their troubles. But the war ended 11 years ago," Nora said, bewildered. James smiled sadly. "Some wars never really end, just go quiet for a while. The Carsons have been stirring up trouble since they moved into the territory 5 years back. Lately, they've gotten bolder: rustling, vandalism, intimidation. Why doesn't the sheriff arrest them? No proof that would stand in court. They're careful, and they've got sympathizers who provide alibis." He rubbed his weathered face. "Most folks just want peace, to build something here without the old hatreds. But men like the Carsons feed on those hatreds, keep them alive." Thomas leaned forward. "Wade confronted the oldest brother, Illy, in town last month. Nearly came to blows." This was a side of Wade that Nora hadn't yet seen: the fierce protector, the man willing to stand against threats to his family and community. It didn't diminish her feelings for him. If anything, it deepened them, adding new dimensions to her understanding of the man she was coming to love. Wade returned several hours later, his expression troubled. Sheriffs gathered a posse to track them, but they've gone to ground. Simmons and his family are staying in town for now. That night, as Wade drove her back to Martha's in the Keller wagon, Nora broached the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Are you in danger from these men, your family?" Wade was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. "We're careful," he finally said. "Pa keeps men watching the boundaries of our land. We don't ride alone if we can help it." "That's not really an answer," Nora pointed out gently. He sighed, glancing at her with a rueful smile. "No, it's not. Truth is, the Carsons have made threats. Nothing specific, but enough that we stay alert." Fear clutched at Nora's heart. What can be done? Time will either calm them down or expose them. Either way, we can't let men like that dictate how we live our lives. He reached over to take her hand. "Please don't worry too much. Dalhart takes care of its own." At Martha's gate, he helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist. "I don't want this trouble to cast a shadow on what's growing between us." Nora looked up at him, this man who had caught her when she fell, who had shown her kindness and patience and growing affection. "It won't," she promised. "If anything, knowing the challenges you face makes me admire your strength all the more." He kissed her then, a deeper kiss than their first one, filled with emotion and unspoken promises. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Wade brushed a strand of hair from her face with tender fingers. "You're becoming essential to me, Nora Larson. I hope you know that." The words warmed her through, a beacon against the chill of the night and the shadows of potential danger. "As you are to me, Wade Keller." Over the next few weeks, tensions in the area remained high. The sheriff and his deputies increased patrols, and ranchers took extra precautions with their livestock and property. Wade continued to call on Nora, but their carefree rides were replaced by more careful outings, always with an eye to safety. December arrived with a cold snap that blanketed Dalhart in frost each morning. Martha's house was warm and festive, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the approaching Christmas season. Nora found herself settling into frontier life with increasing comfort, the shock of her parents' deaths gradually softening into a gentle sadness that no longer overwhelmed her daily existence. One afternoon, as she and Martha worked together making Christmas cookies, her aunt broached the subject that had been hovering unspoken between them. "Wade's intentions seem quite serious, dear." Nora focused on cutting star shapes from the dough, hoping Martha wouldn't notice her blush. "Yes, I believe they are. And your feelings? Are they equally serious?" Looking up, Nora met her aunt's kind gaze. "They are. I never expected to find someone like him, especially not so soon after coming here, but there's something between us that feels right." Martha smiled, patting Nora's flour-dusted hand. "I see it when you're together, the way you look at each other like you found something precious you didn't know you were seeking." "Is it too soon?" Nora asked, voicing the doubt that occasionally troubled her. "We've known each other barely 2 months. Time is measured differently out here," Martha replied thoughtfully. "Life is harder, more precarious. People learn to recognize what matters quickly." She began arranging the cut cookies on a baking sheet. "Your uncle and I knew each other just 6 weeks before we married. We had 42 good years together before he passed." This was comforting to Nora, who had been raised with Boston's more conservative courtship traditions. "Wade hasn't actually proposed," she felt compelled to point out. Martha's eyes twinkled. "Not yet, but I'd wager he's gathering his courage. James mentioned he's been asking about his mother's ring. The thought sent a flutter of excitement through Nora's chest. Before she could respond, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. It was Thomas Keller, Wade's younger brother, his expression urgent. "Miss Nora, Mrs. Finch, sorry to disturb you, but Wade sent me to fetch you both. You need to come to our place right away." Alarm shot through Nora. "Is Wade hurt? Has something happened?" Thomas shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. But there's been another incident. The Carsons burned the schoolhouse last night. The whole town's gathering at our ranch to decide what to do. Wade thought you'd want to be there." The Keller ranch was crowded with people when they arrived. Nearly every family in Dalhart had responded to James Keller's call for a town meeting. The atmosphere was tense, angry murmurs filling the large main room where chairs and benches had been arranged in rough rows. Wade met them at the door, his face grave but his eyes lighting with relief at seeing Nora. "Thank you for coming," he said, taking her hand briefly. "Pa's about to start." James Keller stood at the front of the room, his tall frame commanding attention as he raised his hands for silence. "Folks, thank you for coming out today. As you've all heard, the schoolhouse was burned to the ground last night. Thankfully, no one was hurt, but this can't continue. Our children need a place to learn, and all of us need to feel safe in our homes and businesses." A middle-aged man stood up from the crowd. "We know who's behind this, James. The Carsons have been escalating for months. It's time we take matters into our own hands." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. "That's exactly what they want," Wade spoke up, moving to stand beside his father. "For us to form a mob to lower ourselves to their level. If we do that, we're no better than they are." "So what do you suggest?" Another voice challenged. "Wait for them to burn our homes with our families inside." The sheriff, a stolid man named Harlan Anderson, stood next. "We have a legal system for a reason, folks. I've sent telegrams to the federal marshal in Amarillo. They're sending deputies to help maintain order and investigate these crimes." "And when will they arrive?" someone called out. "Next week. Next month. Meanwhile, the Carsons are free to continue their reign of terror." The debate continued, growing heated at times. Nora watched Wade closely, noting the calm authority with which he spoke, the respect others showed him despite his relative youth. He advocated for increased vigilance, organized patrols of town property, but always within the bounds of law. "We built Dalhart to be different," he reminded the gathering. "A place where people could start fresh, without the divisions and hatreds of the past. If we abandon those principles now, we lose something precious." His words seemed to resonate with many, the angry mood gradually shifting to one of determined resolve. James Keller proposed a schedule of volunteer patrols, and men began signing up for shifts. The women, led by Martha, organized a committee to arrange temporary schooling in the church until the schoolhouse could be rebuilt. As the meeting dispersed, Wade found Nora helping Martha distribute coffee to those lingering to discuss details. "Walk with me," he asked quietly. "I need some air." Outside, the December afternoon was crisp and clear, the sun beginning its early winter descent. They walked toward a small rise behind the main house, neither speaking until they reached the top. From there, they could see the entire Keller ranch spread out before them, and beyond it, the distant outlines of Dalhart. "I'm sorry you had to see all that," Wade finally said. "It's not the peaceful life I'd want to offer you." Something in his tone made Nora's pulse quicken. "Life is never entirely peaceful, Wade. There were different kinds of troubles in Boston, less dramatic, perhaps, but no less real." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Nora, I had plans for how I wanted to do this, somewhere beautiful with time to find the right words." He gestured ruefully toward the house, where people were still gathering in small groups, discussing the crisis. Not in the middle of chaos and uncertainty, but today reminded me that time isn't guaranteed. Before she fully realized what was happening, Wade had taken her hands in his and dropped to one knee before her. "Nora Larson, I've loved you since the moment you fell into my arms. You bring light and joy to my life in ways I never imagined possible. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Nora's eyes, happiness bubbling up inside her like a wellspring. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Wade. Yes, I will marry you." He stood, gathering her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally parted, Wade reached into his pocket and produced a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Pa gave it to me last week. Said he knew from the first time he saw us together that it belonged on your hand." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Nora felt a sense of rightness, of completion. Despite the tensions in Dalhart, despite the recent upheaval in her life, in this moment everything aligned with perfect clarity. This was where she belonged with Wade, building a life together on this frontier that had already begun to feel like home. They returned to the house hand in hand, their happiness a stark contrast to the somber mood of the gathering. Martha noticed immediately, her eyes going to Nora's left hand, a smile blooming on her face. "James," she called across the room, "I believe congratulations are in order." James Keller looked up, saw the ring on Nora's finger, and his weathered face broke into a wide grin. "Well now, that's the best news we've had in a long while." Word spread quickly through the assembled townspeople. The mood shifted dramatically as people pressed forward to offer congratulations, momentarily setting aside their concerns to celebrate something joyful. "When's the wedding to be?" someone called out. Wade and Nora exchanged looks, realizing they hadn't discussed this detail. "Spring," Wade suggested. "When the wildflowers are in bloom, spring is perfect," Nora agreed, squeezing his hand. The engagement provided a much-needed respite from the tension gripping Dalhart, if only for an evening. Plans were enthusiastically discussed, Martha immediately offering her garden for the ceremony, the pastor's wife suggesting hymns, the seamstress volunteering to help with a wedding dress. For a few precious hours, the threat of the Carsons receded into the background. Reality reasserted itself the next morning when news arrived that cattle had been stolen from a neighboring ranch. The sheriff and his deputies, along with several volunteers including Wade, rode out to investigate. "Be careful," Nora urged as Wade prepared to leave. "Please." He kissed her briefly, the warmth of his lips a promise. "Always am. I'll be back before sundown." True to his word, Wade returned safely that evening, though with frustrating news. Trail led toward the territorial border, then scattered. They're getting smarter about covering their tracks. December progressed, the town's festive preparations for Christmas continuing despite the undercurrent of vigilance. The federal marshals arrived, 4 stern-faced men who set up headquarters in the sheriff's office and began a systematic investigation of the recent crimes. Nora and Wade's engagement became a bright spot in the community's consciousness, their obvious happiness providing a counterpoint to the tensions. They began making plans for their future. Wade had inherited land adjacent to his father's ranch, with a small cabin that could be expanded into a proper home. "It needs work," he admitted as he showed Nora the property, "but the location is good. There's water year-round from the creek and some of the best grazing land in the county." Nora walked through the simple 2-room cabin, already envisioning how it could become a home. "We could add another room here," she suggested, pointing to the eastern wall. For children, eventually. Wade's eyes softened at the mention of children. I'd like that. A whole passel of little ones running around. The image warmed Nora's heart, their future family, growing together in this place. So would I. Christmas Eve arrived with a light dusting of snow, rare enough in that part of Texas to seem magical. The entire town gathered at the church for services, the building glowing with candlelight and decorated with evergreen boughs. Nora sat beside Wade in the Keller family pew, her hand securely held in his, feeling a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The service concluded with Silent Night, the congregation singing in harmony as candles illuminated each face. Looking around at these people who had welcomed her so warmly, who faced hardship with resilience and faith, Nora felt a surge of gratitude. Her journey to Dalhart, however dramatic its beginning, had brought her to exactly where she needed to be. Outside the church, people lingered to exchange Christmas greetings and small gifts. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant overhead, the air filled with laughter and goodwill. The peace was shattered by the sound of galloping hooves. A rider burst into the churchyard, his horse lathered despite the cold, his voice ragged with urgency. Fire! The Keller ranch is burning. The words fell like stones into still water, shock rippling through the gathered crowd. James Keller pushed forward, his face ashen. Where? How bad? The main house, sir. Just starting when I left, but spreading fast. The hands are trying to contain it. Wade was already moving, shouting for horses, James close behind. Men broke away from their families, organizing themselves into groups, some to fight the fire, others to guard the town in case this was a diversion for another attack. Go home with Martha, Wade told Nora quickly, pausing only long enough to press a hasty kiss to her forehead. I'll send word when I can. Before she could protest, he was gone, mounting a borrowed horse and galloping away with his father and brothers. Martha took Nora's arm, her expression grim. Come, dear, there's nothing we can do there. The men know their business. But Nora couldn't bear the thought of waiting passively for news. No, Aunt Martha, I need to go. That's going to be my family too. After a moment's hesitation, Martha nodded. You're right. Samuel, she called to the livery owner. Can you hitch up your wagon? We need to get to the Keller place. By the time they arrived, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The main house was engulfed in flames, but a bucket line had formed from the well to the nearest outbuildings, preventing the fire from spreading further. Men worked with grim efficiency, some fighting the blaze directly, others moving livestock to safety, still others patrolling the perimeter with rifles at the ready. Nora spotted Wade directing efforts near the barn, his face streaked with soot, his shirt sleeves rolled up despite the cold. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him unharmed. He looked up as the wagon approached, surprise and then concern crossing his features. Nora, you shouldn't be here. It's not safe. I couldn't stay away, she replied simply, already climbing down from the wagon. What can I do to help? His expression softened slightly. The Hands families are gathering in the bunkhouse. Food, water, bandages for minor burns, they could use help. Nora nodded, squeezing his hand briefly before hurrying toward the long, low building where the ranch hands lived. Martha followed, her practical nature asserting itself in this crisis. Inside, they found women and children huddled together, some crying, others stoically silent. Several ranch hands were being treated for burns and smoke inhalation. Without hesitation, Nora and Martha set to work, organizing the available supplies, comforting frightened children, applying salve to blistered hands. Hours passed. the night growing colder as the fire gradually yielded to the determined efforts to contain it. By dawn, only smoldering ruins remained of the once proud Keller home. Wade found Nora in the bunkhouse, where she had finally persuaded a young mother to rest while she held the woman's fretful baby. He stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, his face etched with exhaustion and grief, yet softening at the sight of her gently rocking the infant. "You're a natural," he said quietly, coming to sit beside her on the narrow bunk. "How bad is it?" She asked, noting the defeated slump of his shoulders. "The house is gone. We saved the barns, the corrals, most of the equipment." He ran a hand through his soot-stained hair. "Pa's taking it hard, that house. He built it for my mother, every board, every nail chosen with care." Nora leaned against him, offering silent support. "Was anyone seriously hurt?" "No, thank God. Burns, smoke, exhaustion, but nothing life-threatening." His voice hardened. "It was deliberate. They left their mark a carved C on the gate post." "The Carsons." Wade nodded grimly. "The marshals are organizing a search party. They have authority to cross territorial lines if needed." The baby in Nora's arms had finally dozed off, tiny fingers curled around her thumb. She looked down at the peaceful face, then back to Wade's tired one. "What will you do now?" "Rebuild." "What else can we do?" His gaze met hers, determination pushing through the weariness. "Pa and the boys will stay with neighbors until we can get something temporary up. The cabin on my land, our land, is untouched. I checked." "You could stay with us," Nora offered. "Martha has room." Wade smiled faintly, touching her cheek with gentle fingers. "Thank you, but I need to be here, help Pa salvage what we can, get started on rebuilding before winter really sets in." Understanding, Nora nodded. "Then I'll help too, we all will. That's what family does." The word family seemed to strike Wade deeply. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I was afraid," he admitted in a low voice. "When I saw the flames, all I could think was that they might have come for you too, that I might lose you before we'd even begun our life together." "You won't lose me," Nora promised. "Not to fire, not to fear, not to anything." In that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of destruction, they found a deeper connection, a shared determination that love would prevail despite the forces aligned against it. The days following the fire brought the community of Dalhart together in ways Nora had never witnessed before. Families opened their homes to the displaced Kellers and their ranch hands. Men volunteered labor and materials to begin rebuilding. Women organized meals, mended salvaged clothing, and gathered household necessities to replace what had been lost. Christmas Day, which should have been a time of celebration, became instead a day of solidarity and shared purpose. The traditional town feast was repurposed as a working meal for those helping at the Keller Ranch. Children delivered presents to where their recipients were working rather than gathering in homes. Nora spent the day moving between Martha's kitchen, where women prepared food for the workers, and the ranch, where Wade was overseeing the clearing of debris. His eyes lit up whenever he saw her approach, his weary expression brightening momentarily. "Merry Christmas," she said softly, handing him a small package wrapped in brown paper during one such visit. "It's not much, but—" Inside was a hand-knitted scarf, deep blue like his eyes, that she had been working on secretly for weeks. "To keep you warm," she explained, somewhat shyly. Wade wrapped it around his neck immediately, despite the unseasonable warmth of the day. "It's perfect, thank you." From his pocket, he produced a small package of his own. "I was carrying this last night, planning to give it to you after the service." Nora unwrapped it to find a delicate silver bracelet, simple but elegant, with a small charm in the shape of a star. "To match your hairpin," Wade explained. "A reminder that even on the darkest nights, stars still shine." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Nora's eyes. "Help me put it on." As Wade fastened the bracelet around her wrist, his fingers lingering against her skin, James Keller approached, his expression grave. "Wade, marshals want to talk to us. They've found something." The something turned out to be a witness, a young cowhand who had been checking fence lines near the territorial border on Christmas Eve. He reported seeing 3 men riding hard toward Carson land, shortly after the time the fire must have been set. "It's not proof that would stand in court," the lead marshal explained to the gathered men, "but it's enough for us to obtain a warrant to search their property." Wade's jaw tightened. "When?" "First light tomorrow. We'd like you and your father to accompany us, identify any items that might have been stolen from your ranch or others in the area." That night, back at Martha's house, Nora found sleep elusive. The prospect of Wade confronting the Carsons, even with marshals present, filled her with dread. These were men who had already demonstrated their willingness to destroy property. What might they do when cornered? Dawn found her waiting anxiously on the porch as Wade rode up, dressed in his warmest clothes, the blue scarf around his neck. His expression was somber but determined. "I wish you weren't going," Nora said, coming down the steps to meet him. "These men are dangerous. That's why we need to stop them now before anyone gets hurt." Wade took her hands in his. "The marshals know their business. We'll be careful. Promise me you'll come back safely." "I promise." He kissed her then, a kiss that held both reassurance and a depth of feeling that words couldn't express. "Keep this for me," he added, pressing something into her palm. It was a small wooden carving of a horse, worn smooth with handling. "My mother gave it to me when I was 7, Wade explained. "Said as long as I had it, I'd always find my way home. I'll be coming back for it and for you." The posse, 4 federal marshals, Sheriff Anderson and 2 deputies, Wade, James, and 3 other ranchers whose property had been targeted, departed as the sun crested the horizon. Nora watched until they disappeared from view, the small wooden horse clutched tightly in her hand like a talisman. The day stretched endlessly, each hour an exercise in patience and faith. Martha kept Nora busy with household tasks, but both women's thoughts were clearly with the men riding toward potential confrontation. Late afternoon brought the distant sound of hoofbeats, too many for it to be just a messenger. Nora rushed to the window, heart pounding, to see the posse returning. Her eyes searched frantically for Wade, releasing a breath of relief when she spotted him riding beside his father, both apparently unharmed. She was on the porch before they reached the gate, restraining herself from running to meet them only by the thinnest thread of propriety. Wade dismounted wearily, but with a lightness to his movements that hadn't been there that morning. "It's over," he said simply, climbing the steps to take her hands. "We found stolen cattle, tools, even furniture from the schoolhouse in their barn. Ellie Carson tried to run, fired at the marshals. They returned fire. Is he?" "Wounded, not killed. He and his brothers are in custody, their father too, though he claims he knew nothing about their activities." Wade's eyes held a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "They'll stand trial in Amarillo next month." The news spread quickly through Dalhart, a collective weight lifting from the community. That evening, a spontaneous gathering formed in the town square, not a celebration, exactly, but a communal exhale, a chance to look forward rather than constantly over their shoulders. "What happens now?" Nora asked Wade as they stood slightly apart from the crowd, his arm around her waist. "We rebuild. The house, the schoolhouse, our lives." He looked down at her, his expression softening. "Starting with our wedding, if you're still willing to become Mrs. Wade Keller this spring." "More willing than ever," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though we don't have to wait until spring, I'd marry you tomorrow if you asked. A slow smile spread across his face. "Would you now?" "Because I happen to know the pastor is standing right over there, and I'm fairly certain he's not busy tomorrow." Nora's heart skipped. "Are you serious? What about all the plans? The garden ceremony, the dress? Those things would be nice," Wade acknowledged, "but they're not what matters. What matters is you and me, building a life together. After everything that's happened, I don't want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." The sincerity in his eyes melted any hesitation Nora might have felt. "Then let's do it. Tomorrow." They were married the next day in Martha's parlor, decorated hastily but lovingly with winter greenery and candles. Nora wore her best dress, not a wedding gown, but a becoming blue frock that matched the scarf Wade still wore around his neck, despite the warmth of the room. Martha cried happy tears, and James Keller stood proudly beside his son as witness. The entire town seemed to squeeze into the small house or gather in the yard outside, bearing simple gifts and abundant good wishes for the couple who had found each other under such unusual circumstances. "I, Wade, take you, Nora, to be my lawful wedded wife." Wade's voice was steady and sure as he repeated the pastor's words, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Nora spoke her own vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment, from grief in Boston to joy in Dalhart, from falling out of a runaway stagecoach to falling into the arms of the man who now became her husband. "By the power vested in me," the pastor concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Wade gathered her close, his kiss a promise of all the days to come. Around them, the assembled townspeople burst into applause and cheers, celebrating not just a marriage but a reaffirmation of life and love in the face of adversity. That night, in the small cabin that would be their first home together, Wade and Nora began their married life with tender passion and whispered promises. Outside, the winter stars shone bright over Dalhart, a reminder that even the darkest nights give way to dawn. Spring arrived in a riot of color, wildflowers carpeting the plains around Dalhart in blue, yellow, and red. The Keller family home had been rebuilt, larger and sturdier than before. The schoolhouse, too, had risen from its ashes, with new desks and books provided by donations from as far away as Fort Worth. Lee Carson and his brothers had been convicted at their trial, sentenced to years in a federal prison. Their father, found guilty of lesser charges, had sold his land and moved east, ending the threat that had hung over the community for so long. For Nora and Wade, the months since their hasty winter wedding had been busy ones. Together, they had expanded the small cabin into a proper home, adding rooms, building furniture, planting a garden. Wade's natural talent for construction combined with Nora's eye for making a house comfortable created a place that reflected them both. On their 6-month anniversary, they hosted a gathering for family and friends, a proper wedding celebration. Martha insisted on calling it. Nora wore the white dress she'd originally planned for a spring ceremony, and Wade, cleaned up from his ranch work, looked handsome enough to take her breath away all over again. As twilight settled over the gathering, Wade led Nora away from their guests, toward the small rise that offered the best view of their land. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "Though I have news that might make us even happier." Wade looked down at her questioningly. Nora took his hand and placed it gently against her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby come winter." The wonder that spread across his face was everything she had hoped for. "A baby? You're certain?" Martha confirmed it yesterday. She said she suspected for weeks but wanted to be sure before telling me. Wade gathered her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with awe. "Our child." Setting her down gently, he placed both hands on her stomach, as if already trying to connect with the tiny life growing within. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter. Our child will have the best of both worlds, your intelligence and grace, well, hopefully not my stubbornness." Nora laughed, covering his hands with her own. "I happen to love your stubbornness. It's what made you stand up to the Carsons, what helped you rebuild after the fire." She looked up at him, her heart full. "It's part of what makes you the man I fell in love with." "Fell" being the operative word, Wade teased, reminding her of their dramatic first meeting. "Best fall I ever took," Nora replied, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Though I hope our child inherits your knack for being in the right place at the right time." They stood together as darkness settled fully over the land, stars emerging one by one in the vast Texas sky. From the direction of their home came the sounds of laughter and music, their friends and family continuing the celebration. "We should go back," Nora said eventually. "They'll be wondering where we've gone." Wade nodded but made no move to leave, his arms still around her, his gaze on the horizon where their land stretched toward the distant hills. "Sometimes I can hardly believe how fortunate I am," he said softly. "To have found you, to be building this life together, now to have a child on the way." "We've been blessed," Nora agreed. "Through all the difficulties, all the dangers, something good was waiting for us on the other side." Hand in hand, they walked back toward the light and warmth of their home, where family and friends awaited them. Behind them, the stars continued their ancient dance over Dalhart, Texas, witnesses to a love that had begun with a fall and grown stronger through every trial. In the years that followed, Nora would often think back to that moment when the stagecoach door had flung open and she had tumbled through the air, certain that her life was ending. Instead, it had been just beginning, caught safely in the arms of a cowboy who would become her husband, her partner, the father of her children, the love of her life. Their first child, a son they named James after his grandfather, arrived on a cold December night with Martha serving as midwife. Wade paced outside the bedroom door until the infant's first cry pierced the night, then burst in to find Nora exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. "He has your eyes," she told Wade as he knelt beside the bed, touching his son's small hand with wondering fingers. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Emily, named for Nora's mother, with her father's wheat-colored hair and her mother's gentle spirit. The children grew strong in the clean air and open spaces of the ranch, surrounded by love and the tight-knit community of Dalhart. Wade's skills as a rancher and builder earned him respect throughout the region. Under his guidance, the Keller Ranch prospered, expanding its operations and weathering the inevitable droughts and difficulties with resilience. Nora, meanwhile, became a valued member of the community, teaching at the school for several years before their children were born, later serving on committees to bring more cultural opportunities to the growing town. As Dalhart expanded with the arrival of the railroad and new settlers, the story of Wade catching Nora as she tumbled from a runaway stagecoach became something of a local legend. Children would beg to hear the tale, embellishing it with each retelling until it sounded more like something from a dime novel than actual events. "Did you really fight off 20 bandits, Pa?" young James would ask, eyes wide with excitement. Wade would chuckle, glancing at Nora with that special smile reserved just for her. "Not quite 20, and your mother was the brave one, surviving that wild ride." On their 10th anniversary, Wade surprised Nora with a gift, a small painting he had commissioned from an artist passing through town. It depicted the moment of her fall, artistic license making the scene more dramatic than reality, but capturing something essential about their story. "To remind us how it all began," Wade said as she unwrapped it. "How one moment of danger brought us the greatest happiness of our lives." Nora hung the painting in their bedroom, where it served as a daily reminder of how quickly life could change, how love could arrive in the most unexpected ways. 25 years after that fateful day, Dalhart had grown into a proper town with paved streets, a bank, a hotel, and even a small opera house that Nora had helped establish. The Keller Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the county, now run jointly by Wade and their son James, with Emily's husband Nathan increasingly involved in the business as well. On a warm autumn evening, very like the one when Wade had first proposed, they sat together on the porch of their home, no longer the small cabin of their early married life, but a comfortable house that had expanded as their family grew. Their hands were clasped loosely between them, a gesture so familiar it was almost unconscious. "Remember when you taught me to ride?" Nora asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "I was so terrified of falling." Wade smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "You were a natural once you got over that fear, just like everything else you've tackled in this life out here. I had a good teacher." She squeezed his hand. "In more ways than one." From inside the house came the sound of laughter. Their children and grandchildren gathered for Sunday dinner. Emily's twins, now 7, were chasing each other through the rooms despite their mother's attempts to settle them down. James's wife was calling everyone to the table, her voice rising above the happy chaos. "Should we go in?" Nora asked, "before they come looking for us?" Wade shook his head, content to linger a moment longer. "Let them wait. I'm enjoying the view." But he wasn't looking at the sunset painting the landscape in gold and amber. He was looking at her, his blue eyes still holding that special light that had always been reserved just for Nora. "What are you thinking?" she asked, though after all these years together, she could often guess his thoughts before he voiced them. "I'm thinking that catching you was the best thing I ever did," he replied simply. "And that I'd do it all again, 100 times over, for the life we've built together." Nora leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full of gratitude for the journey they had shared from that dramatic first meeting to this peaceful moment surrounded by the family they had created. "So would I, my love, so would I." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land they had nurtured together, Wade and Nora Keller rose from their porch chairs and went inside to join their family, their hands still clasped, their hearts still bound by a love that had begun when she was tossed from a runaway wagon and the cowboy caught her in his arms.